It is the late afternoon of August 18th, 1966. Within the next few hours, D Company of the 6th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, will be involved in Australia's most brutal day of fighting in the Vietnam War, in what will be known as the Battle of Longtan. The Battle of Longtan will see approximately 108 young men of D Company in the fight of their lives against over 2,500 battle-hardened Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers. 11 Platoon in particular will experience a multitude of human wave attacks on a scale that rocks them to their very core. Today, we take a look at the key events of this battle and attempt to take you on a journey as we shine a light on one of Australia's most important days in military history. Lieutenant General Sir John Wilton, the Chief of the General Staff at that time, saw things differently when it came to the war in Vietnam. Rather than just following the lead of the US forces, he had a bold vision for Australia's role in the conflict. Having witnessed the devastating toll of the Korean War, where heavy casualties and overwhelming firepower defined the conflict, he recognized that conventional strategies wouldn't suffice against the guerrilla tactics employed by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. It wasn't what Australian soldiers were trained for, and he didn't believe this approach would be effective. Instead, he believed that Australia needed to carve out its own space in Vietnam, its own independent operations. Drawing from counterinsurgency strategies honed during operations in Malaya, he believed Australia could wage a more calculated and effective campaign. This decision would redefine the Australian military presence in Vietnam. In choosing the location for the Australian base of operation, he had several key considerations. Firstly, it was essential to position Australian forces far from the volatile borders of Cambodia and Laos, steering clear of potential cross-border conflicts. No one wanted cross-border conflicts sparking a wider war. Next, proximity to a port was crucial for logistical support, ensuring the flow of supplies. And lastly, Wilton wanted to make sure they operated independently, far from US forces, so the troops wouldn't get sucked into massive conventional battles under American command. Phuoc Toi Province emerged as the most suitable option. It was an area that had significant enemy activity. It provided direct access to the South China Sea and linked to the vital port of Vung Tau, all while covering Saigon's eastern flank and staying clear of major American military presence. It also had the ideal terrain that suited the Australian style of operations. With predominantly weak South Vietnamese forces in the area, Australia had the opportunity to conduct their operations on their own terms. In the heart of Phuoc Toi, Wilton selected Nui Dat as the base for the 1st Australian Task Force. Though sparsely populated, it offered a significant advantage. It lay between the Viet Cong to the north and populated areas to the south, allowing Australian forces to establish a stronghold that would protect Saigon and nearby US bases. However, Phuoc Toi was a known Viet Cong stronghold, and Nui Dat was smack bang in the middle of it, effectively placing themselves between the populated areas and the enemy. The 1st Australian Task Force at this time was made up of less than 4,000 men, 1 ATF Task Force Command, 2 battalions, 5 and 6 Royal Australian Regiment, 1st Armoured Personnel Carrier Squadron, 1st Field Regiment, Artillery and 9 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force. With Nui Dat established as the base of operations, the stage was set for a significant confrontation. At 2:43 a.m. on August 17th, in the dead of the night, the stillness over Nui Dat was shattered by a sudden and violent assault. The 1st Australian Task Force base came under sudden attack. Enemy mortars and recoilless rifles pounded the area for a tense 22 minutes, leaving 67 craters in the ground, and 24 soldiers were wounded. At 2:50 a.m., Australian forces responded swiftly, launching a counter-bombardment of artillery and mortar fire. For nearly 2 hours, the bombardment continued, with the relentless pounding lasting until 4:10 a.m. The base was left on high alert, bracing for a possible full-scale assault. But, to everyone's surprise, no follow-up attack came, resulting in an unsettling atmosphere that lingered throughout the camp. At first light, B Company of the 6th Royal Australian Regiment was tasked with tracking down the enemy. They found the clues, mortar base plates and scattered tracks, but no sign of the attackers themselves. With unease hanging in the air, B Company spent the night in the field, alert and ready, waiting to see what would unfold next. The next morning on August 18, 1966, D Company embarked on what would become one of the most defining moments in Australian military history. D Company, led by Major Harry Smith, comprises 3 platoons, 10, 11 and 12, along with Company HQ and 3 men of Forward Observation Team from New Zealand's 161 Battery. At 11 a.m, this total of 108 soldiers left the base toward the rubber plantation at Longtan, dispatched to relieve B Company and continue the search for North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong forces. As Delta Company left the Nui Dat base, a group of entertainers, including Coljoy and Little Patty, were busy setting up their equipment for an upcoming concert for the troops. By early afternoon, around 1 p.m, D Company met up with B Company, relieving them and allowing them to make their way back to Nui Dat. They were excited about the upcoming concert. D Company set off into the rubber plantation. Little did they know, they were heading into a hornet's nest of enemy combatants. From 1 p.m. to 3:40 p.m, the search continued as D Company set out to follow cart tracks heading east. After advancing about 200 meters, the tracks diverged into 2 paths, both still leading eastward. D Company adjusted their formation. 10 Platoon chose the northern track, while 11 Platoon took the southern track. At approximately 3:40 p.m, 11 Platoon made first contact. Having just crossed over a track, Sergeant Bob Buick spotted 5 to 6 Viet Cong soldiers. Acting swiftly, Sergeant Buick fired 2 precise shots, dispatching one enemy and forcing the others to retreat. An AK-47 was recovered from the fallen soldier, and it was suspected that at least one more Viet Cong had been wounded. Sensing an opportunity, the 11th Platoon commander requested permission for hot pursuit to follow up the enemy. Recognizing the urgency, Major Harry Smith approved, and 11 Platoon went on the chase after the enemy. Major Smith's quick assessment being that a platoon was well able to handle the 5 or 6 VC, one of which was at least wounded. With 11 Platoon pushing ahead, Major Smith ordered 10 Platoon to maintain its direction and rate of advance. Company HQ and 12 Platoon would advance behind 10 Platoon. The Viet Cong fled east, followed by 11 Platoon, as the company closed up and followed at a slow pace. Clearing the hut, the 11th Platoon lost sight of the Viet Cong patrol, but kept following the blood trail eastwards. At around 4:10 p.m, 11 Platoon was hit by a major enemy force, facing intense fire from at least 2 machine guns. The left-hand section suffered heavy casualties. In response, 2nd Lieutenant Gordon Sharp ordered the right-hand section of 11 Platoon to advance, forming a reverse L-shaped formation to fire directly across the front of the platoon towards the most intense enemy fire. It was estimated at this time that they were up against at least a platoon size, around 20 to 30 men. However, it wasn't long before the intensity of the enemy firing increased. What started as an attack on their left-hand side, now the enemy started to present forward to their position. Sergeant Buick reorganized the right-hand section of 11 to a reverse L shape, protecting their southern flank. Pinned down and taking casualties, 11 Platoon wasn't in a position to withdraw. As the engagement progressed, it wasn't long before they were being flanked on their left and right-hand sides. From this, and the sheer noise and intensity of the gunfire, it was now clear they weren't up against a platoon size as they initially thought, but more like a company size of around 80 to 100 men. What had started out as a contact, something they were all very used to, was now a battle. 11 Platoon were now in a fierce fight for their very lives. With their training kicking in, 11 Platoon brought fire to the enemy positions and called in artillery. In a swift and decisive move, Lieutenant Gordon Sharp radioed New Zealand Forward Artillery Observer Captain Maury Stanley, urgently requesting artillery support, while the enemy continued their assault on 11 Platoon with large waves from the east and smaller probes from the northwest and southeast. At 4:12 p.m., the New Zealand 161 Artillery Battery began firing in support of 11 Platoon. Just a few minutes later, Lieutenant Sharp called for additional artillery, reporting enemy attacks from the left, front and right. He urgently stated, "It's bigger than I thought it was. They're going to attack us." From 4:15 p.m. to 4:30 p.m., the situation escalated. Smith informed his commanding officer, Colonel Townsend, about 11 platoons' intense engagement with a large Viet Cong force of around 80 to 100 men. Townsend ordered B Company to hold position for support. Smith radioed 11 Platoon, reassuring that 10 Platoon was on the way. Smith ordered 2nd Lieutenant Jeff Kendall's 10th Platoon to find and support 11, but they soon found themselves in their own fight. At around 4:30 p.m., 10 Platoon commenced moving towards the sound of the firing. Their heads on a swivel, it was obvious that their mates in 11 were in serious trouble. Why would their commander want them to go over there otherwise? The tropical rain now pouring down, adding to the difficulties of the battle. After walking approximately 100 to 150 meters, they saw the enemy in large numbers moving directly in front of them, left to right across their front. This was the enemy group trying to outflank 11 Platoon's left-hand side. The sound of the rain, the intense gunfire and the artillery all making it near impossible to communicate and relay orders. Kendall dropped down to one knee and opened fire on the enemy. The men of 10th Platoon didn't need any further instructions. They too dropping down and opening fire. Within moments, they had dispatched most of the right-hand side of the attacking force. 10 Platoon got back on their feet and continued their walk towards 11. However, after walking only a further 10 meters or so, all hell broke loose. A hail of fire hitting 10 Platoon on two sides, forcing them back to ground. They were pinned down. As Kendall was radioing in artillery fire coordinates, his radio was knocked out of commission. Smith lost all communications with 10. It was at this time that Smith realized he needed all the artillery support he could get. He radioed for the full regimental firing capacity. That's 3 artillery batteries. Initially, this was declined as standard practice was for 1 battery per battalion. 161 Battery was already in support of the 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. That left 1 battery supporting the 5th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, and 1 battery in general support. However, in no short order, Smith got the other 2 batteries. Back at the task force base, most of the men were happily enjoying the afternoon concert being put on by Cole Joy and Little Patty, unaware of the trouble D Company were currently facing. Commander of 3 Troop 1 APAC Squadron Lieutenant Adrian Roberts, however, noticed that the battery level of artillery fire had increased to regimental fire. That's 18 guns firing continuously. Having been around the American regimental fire before, he understood the gravity of the situation. Our boys were in trouble. With the increase in artillery fire, the noise in the rubber plantation was deafening. Communications with the 10th Platoon were still down. Private William Yank Arkell, realizing he had a spare radio set, was directed to go. He ran through approximately 200 meters of enemy fire to restore radio communication. His bravery was crucial to maintain communication even under intense fire. Kendall, grateful for the radio, made contact with Smith. He reported 10 Platoon was pinned down on 3 sides, taking casualties. Not able to advance forward, Smith ordered the 10th Platoon to withdraw to his position. For those still alive in 11 Platoon, the intensity of the attacks just continued to increase. The VC had commenced their attack with a platoon size. This had then turned into a company-size attack. Now all estimates indicated they were facing an assault on 3 sides from a battalion size. That's around 600 to 700 VC. What was worse is they were coming in by large waves. Large human waves of approximately 100 soldiers on multiple sides and arranged in 2 lines, one in front of the other. The Australian artillery took care of troops in the reserve lines, leaving 11 Platoon to fight off the initial assault waves. But as each line fell, it was replaced with more men, crawling over their own. The Viet Cong were relentless, launching wave after wave of attacks. The enemy fire proved deadly. At 4:33 p.m., 11 Platoon Commander Gordon Sharp was killed while directing artillery fire, leaving Sergeant Bob Buick in command of the platoon. That time, 11 Platoon was nearly surrounded and running low on ammunition. Yet under Buick's leadership, the platoon refused to give in. This was what D Company was made of. Around 4:50 p.m., Buick reported the tragic news that Gordon Sharp had been killed in action at the Battle of Longtan. 11th Platoon was still holding on by a thread. Ammunition was running out, and the enemy was closing in. Buick called for more artillery fire, drop 50, meaning to reduce the distance by 50, placing it just over their heads to hold off the Viet Cong. Between 5:10 to 5:30 p.m., 11 Platoon was enduring intense pressure, watching Viet Cong forces encircle them to the south. After an hour of heavy engagement, they had suffered about 50% casualties and were critically low on ammunition. Major Smith wasn't about to let his men down. Facing critical shortages and intensified VC pressure, Smith requested air support and an urgent ammunition resupply to be airdropped by helicopter. At 5:30 p.m., US jets were dispatched for air support over Longtan, while helicopter crews rushed to prepare ammunition for frontline troops. However, the final authorization for their departure was delayed, hindering this critical resupply mission. As the situation worsened for the Australian forces, large groups of Viet Cong began flanking their positions, threatening to encircle them. Then, the VC consolidated their forces at 10th Platoon, intensifying their assault as 11th Platoon found its position becoming untenable. In response, Sergeant Buick readied his remaining men for a possible withdrawal amid the mounting pressure. Near 5:50 p.m., the artillery fire stopped as the F-100 Super Sabre jets arrived, but due to the rain, pilots struggled to identify the positions of 11 Platoon and the Viet Cong. Realizing this, Smith ordered the planes away and for the artillery guns to recommence firing. Covering 11 Platoon's front was more important now. In just 10 minutes from 5:50 p.m. to 6 p.m., 11 Platoon faced heavy artillery and small arms fire as they swiftly retreated, evacuating all known wounded, but forced to leave behind 15 men in the chaos. Meanwhile, 12th Platoon engaged with Viet Cong patrols attempting to encircle the retreating soldiers. Help was finally on the way. At 6 p.m., two RAF UH-1B Iroquois helicopters succeeded in dropping boxes of ammunition to the company while hovering at treetop level, despite the heavy downpour and the risks from enemy ground fire. The resupply was a critical moment in the battle, arriving just as the Australians were down to their last few rounds. Warrant Officer Jack Kirby, the company sergeant major, played a pivotal role in distributing the ammunition under fire, ensuring that the men could continue the fight. At 6:20 p.m., as daylight was fading, D Company radioed to the base. Enemy could be reorganizing to attack. 2 platoons are about 75% effective. 1 platoon has been almost completely destroyed. We are reorganizing for all-round defense. At 6:35 p.m., the Viet Cong prepared to launch a final, desperate human wave attack. Smith ordered D Company to shrink their perimeter, protect the wounded, get ready for what was coming. As the first waves commenced, the men of D Company dispatched these first lines quickly. It didn't appear to make an impact. More VC followed behind, crawling over their own, relentless in their mission to take D Company. Smith, sensing the situation was reaching breaking point, called in artillery fire to drop 50, danger close. The response from Artillery HQ was that this was unsafe, and they declined the order. Like a red rag to a bull, Smith yelled back, "Fire the bloody guns where we want them, or you will lose the lot of us." Artillery HQ acknowledged. Like a curtain of steel, the artillery dropped dangerously close in front of D Company. But it did its job as Smith intended, holding back the majority of the VC from a complete onslaught. Surrounded with ammunition critically low, there was literally thousands of VC closing in on them. It didn't matter what they did, they just kept on coming. It was at this time the men of D Company prepared for close-quarter fighting, anticipating at any moment their position would be overrun, fighting to the end but in full awareness that sheer numbers would ultimately see the enemy win over. At 7:10 p.m., laying in the mud, preparing for the worst, they heard the engine roar of the Apex coming up on their right-hand side. followed quickly by their 50 caliber guns firing across the enemy front line. The elation felt by the men of D Company was indescribable. Within moments, the Viet Cong got up and ran away, the arrival of the Apex finally breaking the enemy's will. And just like that, the battle was over. Silence fell across the rubber plantation. Not another shot was fired. Moving to a nearby clearing, the Apex, together with A Company and B Company, formed a boxed-shaped perimeter of man and steel, with D Company protected in the middle. The Australians, exhausted and battered, held their positions through the night, wary of a possible return by the enemy. However, the VC did not return. The next morning, a combined force of infantry and armoured personnel carriers went back into the battlefield to conduct a thorough clearance. Major Harry Smith was determined that it was his company that went back into the scene of the battle to recover their own. 245 enemy soldiers were confirmed dead, but the loss of 18 Australian soldiers and 24 wounded was deeply felt. The battle had been a bloody close call, but the extraordinary bravery and discipline of D Company had won the day. It was later established that the 108 men of D Company had held their ground and defended against approximately 2,500 Viet Cong soldiers, including North Vietnamese Army, NVA, regulars from the 275 Regiment of the 5th Division and local forces from the D445 Battalion. D Company's performance during the Battle of Longtan was nothing short of remarkable. Brigadier O.D. Jackson himself acknowledged that it had been a very close thing indeed, but it was the combined strength, courage and leadership of the men that turned the tide. The company's survival depended heavily on the timely and effective use of artillery, along with the coordinated efforts of reinforcements. At the heart of this victory was Major Harry Smith's exceptional tactical leadership. His ability to direct artillery fire and coordinate reinforcements under extreme pressure was critical to their success. As D Company entered the rubber plantation, they were prepared and disciplined. Smith's swift call for artillery support helped hold back the overwhelming Viet Cong forces, showcasing how vital his decisions were throughout the battle. Sergeant Bob Buick once said, "If Harry Smith hadn't been the commander he was, and if the sergeants and corporals of Delta Company hadn't been of the caliber they were, I don't think we would have survived Longtan." These words underscore just how vital leadership, teamwork and courage were on that day. Every soldier played a role, from men like Private Bill Arkell, who risked enemy fire to restore communications, to the seamless cooperation between D Company and artillery teams, helicopter pilots and the armoured personnel carriers. In the end, it was D Company's adaptability and teamwork that ensured their survival. Despite being outnumbered and facing relentless attacks, they stood their ground, reacting swiftly to shifting conditions and making sure that every move counted. As Major Smith himself said, "I am very proud to have commanded Delta Company, who gave their all on that fateful day, above and beyond what would have been expected of them." Though the Vietnam War was long and brutal, the courage and tenacity shown by the men at Longtan serves as a reminder of the human spirit's ability to triumph, even in the darkest of battles. If you're inspired by the resilience and bravery shown at Longtan and want to dive deeper into Australia's military history, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. Thank you for watching.